Hello and a very good day to you all and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Ingrid Sorgård with Procurement Leaders and I will be hosting this session for the next hour or so. Now today we're going to be talking about the Chief Procurement Officer Agenda, creating transformative value in 2024 and beyond. And I'm really looking forward to today's discussion because it's promising to be very, very interesting. And with me today, I have two fantastic speakers. I've got Danielle Miller, who's the Senior Manager at ProcureAbility, and Dan Valero, Senior Director of Indirect and Logistics Procurement at Campbells Soup Company. Now, just a little warning to everyone, we've had some technical difficulties. Unfortunately, Dan is not able to join us with the camera, but he is here on the phone. So hopefully you can all hear him as you can't see him. Now, just a quick intro about our speakers. So Danielle is a Senior Manager at ProcureAbility, as I mentioned, with a primary focus on procurement transformation and change management. She has been in the procurement consulting industry for the last 12 years, supporting clients across various industries and levels of maturity. Dan leads indirect procurement at the Campbells Soup Company. He and his team managed roughly 2.6 billion in spend across categories, including, but not limited to, facility services, MRO, IT, capital, marketing, sales, and logistics. He has over 14 years experience in procurement and supply chain operation roles, and he's also served on active duty as logistics officer in the US Army. Welcome to you both. Very great to have you here with me today.
Thank you.
Now, before I hand over to Danielle and Dan, just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to look at how we can develop a business case and gain leadership support from transformative goals, get support for gap assessment, structure, skills, processes, and policies, prioritize actions for value-driven strategic roadmap and supply chain resilience, and plan to succeed in 2024 and beyond. Just a final few words from me, as always, some housekeeping. As you know, additional resources are available during and after the webinar, so please do check out the additional resources icon. We really want to hear from you as always. Engagement is key, so please don't be shy. Submit your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A function. We will be running a Q&A at the end. It would be great to hear from you. We'll also be running a couple of polls throughout, so please do take the time to participate actively. Again, feedback is really important. So once we wrap up, please take a couple of seconds to fill in the survey questions that will pop up on your screen. And if you have any technical difficulties, hopefully not, but do check out the help section where there's information available, or just put a question in the question box now. Let's get started. So I'm going to hand over to you, Danielle.
Great, thank you. Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar today to talk about driving procurement value in 2024 and beyond. We understand as procurement leaders and advisors, we have a lot of different priorities ongoing right now. So we want to keep this session as engaging and informative as possible. So we're going to keep it light on slides and content today, and then we'll save the last portion of the call for any Q&A. So to get started, I just wanted to start with a question from the audience. So using the chat feature, if you could drop in there, what is one of your top procurement priorities as we head into the upcoming year? And then hopefully we can address some of these comments throughout the discussion today and talk through how you're addressing any of the issues that you're having. So I'll give everyone a moment to drop that into the chat.
They're being very quiet.
All right. So as we get started into the topics for today, as we're wrapping up 2023 and looking forward to 2024, Chief Procurement Officers and their organizations are actively engaged in the complex task of strategizing for the future while also trying to wrap up any key priorities for this year, or at least get them as complete as possible. So through this webinar, we're going to focus on a few different areas for leaders to look to transform their organization from tactical to strategic. The first area is your starting point. So getting a better understanding of where your current levels of maturity are. So through this, we'll be conducting a gap assessment to evaluate people, processes, and technology. As we evaluate these different components, they're used to build recommendations to help identify areas of opportunities. The next step would be taking those key priorities that you've identified and building them into a strategic roadmap. It's very important here that you are taking the time to prioritize based on criticality, value, and potential change. You need to make sure that you're not tackling too much too quickly and that it's going to be addressed in a manageable way. And lastly is making sure that you're developing a solid business case and getting leadership buy-in. It's also important not just getting buy-in from the procurement leadership, but also outside of the business. Getting engagement from leadership support across the organization is going to be essential for driving some of those near and long-term goals. You don't want to just focus on the procurement organization. You want to make sure that the business is empowered and feels the change and is going to be brought along within that journey. So these are some of those key priorities that we're going to be looking at to developing a strategic plan for 2024 and beyond. So before I move on to the next slide, just wanted to pause. Dan, any comments before we jump into some of the challenges that we're seeing within the industry?
No, I no specific comments here. I will piggyback on that. Campbell's is obviously going through this journey right now. As you get into the next content slides, I'll provide some specificity on some of the areas of focus that our procurement organization is going through.
Great. All right. So for the audience, just wanted to open up a polling question for everybody. So does your organization have a procurement transformation strategy in place today? Just looking at the attendee list, it looks like we have folks from a lot of different industries. So it's going to be interesting to see the responses that we get back here. So I'll give a moment for folks to respond to the open poll. Still waiting on some more responses. You can just select it on the screen. Okay. All right, so as I expected, most organizations have a plan in place. This is important. You always have to think through how you're going to drive change across the business, not just from the tactical side, but thinking strategically, what are those areas of opportunity to drive procurement value? So as CPOs and the procurement leaders look at their plan for the future, given the current market conditions, the challenges of financial, geopolitical, the accelerated risk of technology, it's always adding in some additional complexities. So we're going to touch on some of the key issues and challenges that we're seeing and that need to be solved for as you're thinking through your future plans. One of the top ones is obviously on the top of everybody's procurement minds is achieving cost savings. There's a lot of pressures right now given inflation, fluctuating commodity prices, labor costs, and interest rates, which are increasing the cost of doing business. So we need to make sure that you're thinking through a strategy that works for you, determining where potential price increases may impact your business, and then adjusting either your category management strategies or your sourcing plans to reflect that. Another issue is improving operational efficiencies. So CPOs have had to rethink their operating models and processes to improve speed of execution. There's a lot of tightening budgets right now, shortened timelines to respond to business needs. So very important to always keep a forward-looking process and evaluating and making changes as needed. Accounting for digital transformation is important. There's been a lot of rapid advances in AI and other technologies that are forcing us to rethink our operating model and processes. We did get a few questions in ahead of the webinar around AI and how that should be factored into future strategies. So we'll touch on those during the Q&A portion. And then lastly, before I hand it over to Dan, is managing talent. The talent pool for procurement and supply chain professionals has been tight for a few years now. It's likely to continue. So making sure that you're keeping top industry talent, it should really be a key focus area. And this also includes in investing in your current team. So do you have the necessary skills and tools and training opportunities available to enhance and grow your internal team members? So Dan, I'll hand it over to you. Can you kind of talk about some of the issues and challenges that you're facing within Campbell's and across your industry?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Danielle. So I think everyone can probably assimilate that their company is going through some version of a digital or data transformation right now. And whether that's a focus on speed of data exchange, systems connectivity, or anything else under the sun, we're all probably going through something as it relates to digital transformation. And at Campbell's, procurement has been a key area of focus for our data transformation. Spend visibility is an obvious first start, and some categories are easier to manage than others. I manage indirect procurement, and especially in some of the services categories, those categories tend to be where most of the work is needed. Whether that's the fault of wrong categorization, unclear scope of work, which leads to unclear or even unclassified expenses, it creates data issues, it requires cleaning. And obviously, any company that is going through an acquisition of some kind or has multiple systems to connect and consolidate data, it adds variables that ultimately lead to complexity with your data and lower confidence in your data. And we've gone through that journey, and I can't overemphasize how important that prerequisite step is, because the subsequent opportunities to transform that data into something useful gets extremely limited if it's not accurate and usable, right? To the point where the format of the data needs to be consistent, unit of measures need to be consistent, you name it. So we've gone through that grueling cleaning phase of our data, which, by the way, is never done. And our recent focus, a specific example, is how we've been taking those connections of our categories into the revenue management process through building scenarios where one can connect a forecast of, let's say, a raw material to the margin profile of a particular item or SKU. So how does the price of corn, if it's expected to deflate by 5%, how does that change the margin profile for each SKU that uses corn at the press of the button? So this would apply to not only commodity traded items, but also the basis components of commodities and other non-commodity materials. So this has been extremely useful, not only for procurement, our finance teams, our revenue management team, but also the connection to our sales force when they're having conversations with their customers on the impacts of our input costs and how that might translate into a list price change. So there are certainly many other areas of digital transformation that a digital transformation can support. Your data can be used to generate risk profiles based on various factors, geopolitical, weather events, supplier financial data, et cetera. That's just one specific example of how we've been taking our data and translating it into something that's useful to not only procurement, but to the broader organization in their efforts. Danielle also, mentioned at the end here on talent management, back to the natural progression of people, process, technology. It all starts off with the right talent. We've done a lot of work educating our HR business partners on what is procurement, what type of talent are we looking for. So it assists them in their recruitment efforts. This has also been an area where Campbell's does extremely well with recruitment from within our company. We are both an importer and exporter of talent from a procurement function. We take functional experts from within the business and pull them into procurement. It's much easier to teach a mechanical engineer about procurement than it is to teach a procurement person about mechanical engineering. So we definitely lean into that type of import-export of talent within the company. Another area, and something that we've frankly been working a lot with ProcureAbility on, is training. Whether it's training for new procurement professionals or leveraging ProcureAbility to train some of our more tenured folks. How to do a proper category management build, how to negotiate, how to measure risk, financial acumen training, creative ways to approach free cash flow opportunities. So there's been a lot of training that we constantly go through here at Campbell's just to keep our procurement professionals, up to snuff on what it is that's going on in our world. So those are two areas I commented on here that are certainly not to say that the other ones are not, but two key focus areas within indirect procurement.
Great, thank you, Dan. And then what about from the audience? So open up another poll in a second. Just wanted to get a sense from you, what are some of those key challenges that you're seeing across the industry, across your company? What are some of your key priorities? It looks like those can be dropped in the Q&A. We could use that as a chat box for now. I'll give everyone a moment to respond to the poll. Okay, it looks like we're getting some responses now. Only about 20% so far. There we go. All right. So scrolling through here, looks like cost savings is pretty high, operational efficiencies and speed, quite a few on digital transformation, and then some within talent, ESG, and risk management. Great. So moving into now what? So you have these challenges, you've thought through your plans. How do you approach thinking through how to prioritize for 2024 and beyond? So typically ProcureAbility will recommend a 7-step action plan for CPOs and procurement teams to address their near-term and long-term goals. The first step of that is making sure that you have a solid project pipeline. This goes beyond just your typical strategic sourcing pipeline. It also includes prioritizing any process improvements. If we're looking at some of the sourcing projects, you need to begin thinking about how is the estimated spend and potential savings opportunities, how do they compare to what your 2024 savings targets and your goals are, and then determining if there's any gaps that you may need to reshuffle the list. And then the opportunity assessment efforts can also be focused on looking at your overall spend, market assessments, and then validation with your business stakeholders. Speaking of stakeholders, it's critical to drive engagement with the business. I had a client who didn't necessarily understand the value of building strategic relationships with the business stakeholders. And when we brought up the fact that procurement is a customer service organization, there's a little bit of confusion, some resistance, but as we work through the transformation together, we helped build credibility with the business and demonstrate the value of a collaborative partnership. I'm sure you've all heard before that procurement is just a bottleneck. They're adding unnecessary processes and slowing things down. Why do we need to follow this? But it's really important if you're going through a transformative journey, getting their buy-in and support along the way will help demonstrate the additional value that procurement can bring. And then supply chain risk and supplier relationship management. It's important right now, working through developing any mitigation plans to manage supply risk, strengthening your relationships with your incumbent suppliers to ensure that there's continuity of supply, as well as developing new sources of supply through supplier development efforts. As we shift to some of the longer term areas, these are focused more on transformative changes that are gonna help operate more effectively and efficiently. So some examples here would be evaluating your overall procurement organization structure. Do you have the right number of resources based on your spend? Is your organization structured to support their transformation and execute? Or do your team members have the necessary skill set to think strategically and drive value across the organization? For policies and procedures, it's important to think and keep in mind that what you're creating needs to be flexible, but also reduce risk. I've had clients who have been on both sides of the spectrum. Some with policies that are so restrictive that the procurement team felt that they were just an executor of the process and just checking off the boxes. They were sometimes afraid to go outside of the lines and didn't feel empowered to identify some ways to improve the processes. Whereas others had not enough policies and it created a lot of spend leakage and increased costs. So making sure that you get something that works for your organization, evaluating your delegation of authority, making sure that the levels look correct, and something that's going to be flexible. For technology, very important, always thinking about ways to strategize your current technology landscape. What does the future strategy look like to drive innovation? And then exploring any of the new technologies right now, like AI, and assessing, can that be used to help streamline your processes, improve speed and execution? I will say that technology improvements, it is going to require a multi-year plan. This includes strategizing, planning, implementation, and then continuously monitoring. So it's not a quick thing that could be done, within 6 months or so. And then lastly, ESG. So addressing and highlighting some of your organizational ESG goals, establish a program focused on an assessment of your current state, metrics, baseline, and then defining some of those targets to hit. Dan, can you kind of talk through the journey that Campbell's is currently undergoing? Any pain points or success stories that you want to highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wouldn't say that we're at one specific spot in this journey, and certainly, different categories are at various levels of maturity. And obviously, it's not to say that once you get to step 7, you're on easy street and coasting by. You're constantly massaging each of these areas based on the business. That being said, going back to the people, process, technology side, most of our teams are focusing now on process improvement and how technology can assist with elevating their game. We're doing a ton of testing with different RFX tools, leveraging various guided buying options for our field folks. This involves a ton, as Danielle said, involvement with our IT partners, and some of that, yes, absolutely takes time. Testing, rinse and repeat. But a lot of what we've been doing is making sure that we've got, great feedback loops with our stakeholders to make sure we understand what's working, what's not, because at the end of the day, it's all about procurement driving value, but also enhancing our stakeholder experience, right? We want to be invited to the table. We don't want to be seen as that roadblock between what the business needs and what procurement can help support. So as an example, I'll go into something we leaned heavily into, a guided buying tool a couple of years ago, a ton of work to get all of our preferred suppliers uploading their catalogs into a system and building a cadence around how often those catalogs are refreshed. We launched a campaign around the initiative. Campbell's, we have over 21 manufacturing locations and even more distribution sites, so hundreds of users that needed to be trained. And honestly, our adoption rate in the beginning of using this new guided buying tool wasn't great, right? Had to go back out, re-campaign, and through engagement with our senior leaders to help push this effort, our adoption rate versus the previous P2O process and now in this new guided buying option is exponentially higher. And we're seeing now the benefit of us being on a guided buying tool, purchasing things through the same system, and getting data that's easily able to be tracked at a site-specific and user-specific lens. As I mentioned, though, we're always testing things. It's not like, hey, we just did that, we're great. We can stop thinking about it. We've been testing stuff recently with Amazon for Business and other similar tools just to understand what incremental value they can drive. There are, of course, in our space, right, Campbell's, right, we are certainly one that are customer-facing company, so ESG programs are absolutely paramount for us. We have commitments that we've made to the street, so whether that's certain things that we're buying or whether it's reducing our waste to landfill, reducing our water usage, supplier diversity goals, those are things that are constantly evolving and that we just need to make sure are ingrained in our procurement practices. So I'll pause there, Danielle.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Right. So based on our conversation today, I just wanted to break this down to 3 main points, and then we'll move into the Q&A session. So the first, as I mentioned through a few examples, every procurement organization is different. There's various challenges, priorities, level of maturity. You need to find what works for you and your organization. Identifying and prioritizing a plan based on level of impact or ease of implementation is critical to having something that's manageable. The next is plan. So now that you have your priorities identified, we need to develop a plan to tackle. Oftentimes, there's not enough resources or bandwidth to support a transformation. So I recommend setting up dedicated teams, either internally or through a third party with the expertise to assess the current state and drive some of those key initiatives forward. And lastly, progress. Now that you kicked off the initiatives, you're making progress, highlighting both the success and bottlenecks will help demonstrate the value of the program and then determine if any priorities may need to shift. So any last words from you, Dan, before we hand it over to the Q&A portion?
No, I'm ready for questions.
Great. All right, before we, yep.
Sorry,
before
I interrupted you.
Before the Q&A, just wanted to throw this out here as well. We posted a blog recently that highlights some of these key points that we talked through today. So everybody who attended can download a complimentary blog. You can just scan the QR code here. It will also be posted on our LinkedIn page as well. So, all right.
Well, brilliant. Thanks so much, both of you. That was really interesting. I do have some questions, but I just wanted to take the time because there's one that's come in here. I think that's for you, Dan. And you mentioned specifically something about it's easy to train a mechanical engineer to do procurement rather than the other way around. And so the question is that they find it difficult to train the procurement mindset and not everyone can do procurement. So keen to hear your perspectives about this.
Yeah. Obviously, and I would say we've got a healthy mix of different, I would call it, procurement approaches or styles within the procurement organization. You've got the folks that love negotiating and they take a particular approach to their negotiation style, while others may take a less aggressive approach to a negotiation style, but both can be effective, right? And so certainly there are folks that are more tuned in to being a procurement person than others. And throughout the interview process, those are just the soft attributes that you need to pay attention to understand, a mechanical engineer that might be working behind the scenes in their CAD drawings might not like to be supplier facing, and they might not want to have the difficult conversations that come with the role. So those are just pointed questions that you need to ask in that recruitment process of, here's what this means, right? You will be asked to do X, Y, and Z. How comfortable do you feel in those? Have you ever been in those situations before, and how did you approach them? So yeah, absolutely. There are, not every mechanical engineer can be in procurement, and certainly vice versa, but those are just, as a part of your recruitment process, is things to consider, the soft skills that are needed, and the other harder skills too, that come with being a procurement professional.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Please keep those questions coming. I have a list of questions here, but it's always nice to hear from you who are watching us today, just to create some engagement. And if you have any points or comments as well, do put them in the chat. But first for me, how do you demonstrate the value of procurement within the business unit? I don't know who wants to perhaps take that first.
I can take it first, and then Dan, feel free to chime in. As I mentioned, procurement is often seen as a bottleneck and they slow down the process. So you're often dealing with increased complexities driven by multiple factors, the demonstrating that you're providing value, business expectations of procurement, and the ability not only to support, but be an enabler of the overall procurement strategy. So focusing on building those key strategic relationships with your business stakeholders that will alleviate some of the challenges by working together with them to prioritize what are some of their pain points, what are some of those big projects that they need support on, and then working together to achieve those goals.
Yeah, I'll add. Trust me, I can't count the amount of conversations that I've been in where, a procurement engagement violation occurred and the rationale behind it was I needed to move quickly, right? And, that's why those policies and procedures exist, right? And, Danielle mentioned it. The connection to what our business needs are is paramount in the process. And the more that you can get involved in where we have found success is the more that you can connect yourself to your finance organization as well, so that you can get that proactive picture of what's coming down the pike. Because our finance at Campbell's is incredibly mature organization and it knows years in advance of what's needing to be budgeted. So, hey, I'm going to look into that finance AOP picture and see what's coming down the pike. How do I need to position my team in a way that can support that amount of activity? And absolutely those conversations occur with our functional business owners as well. And then if there are gaps, right? If I notice that there's a tremendous amount of activity in one particular category and I might not be resourced to support that amount of activity, that's when you can lean into a third-party provider to help augment where you might be experiencing that gap, right? So that you aren't, at the end of the day, falling that victim to that slowing the business down, that you're ready and able to support whatever it is that the business requires.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question that's come in here, so I'll keep alternating with my questions and audience questions, so do keep them coming. So the question goes, how about procurement, the procurement challenge of predicting economic growth that will affect significant commodities, have significant impact on commodity prices, so the kind of market intel piece?
I think
I'm looking to go first. Anyone?
I thought I heard
sorry, can you repeat the question? It was a little fuzzy.
Sorry. I'm having all sorts of tech issues today. The question is, how about the procurement challenge of predicting the economic growth that will have significant impact on commodity prices?
Yeah, so I can touch on this one. So naturally, over the last couple of years, we've been in extremely volatile marketplaces. And I can't also tell you the amount of indices that we follow is in the hundreds of trying to track whatever it is, whatever the commodity is, and then trying to substantiate with, a price of X commodity is going from Y to Z. How does that translate to our margin profile? How are we giving that data to support sales as they're having their conversations? Along with that digital transformation, another key area of focus of ours has been how do we consolidate our indices into something that is user-friendly, but also the most accurate thing that we've seen to date. We did invest into a system and tool, and honestly, one of our bigger motivations into the tool that we did selected was because it was used by our customers. So our customers using this particular tool Now our sales force and procurement are armed with that exact same tool. So the conversations became much easier to manage because you're now not arguing over which index are you referencing, what tool or system is being used. We're all on the same platform, or at least most of us are on the same platform. So the conversations became easier. And I mentioned earlier that, we went through a big digital transformation connecting how commodity prices affect the margin profile. That used to be an arduous exercise. Tons of Excel spreadsheets trying to connect SKU and item level information together. Now at a press of a button, we have that capability to understand what exactly does the price of corn, I used corn as an example before, what exactly does the price of corn going from one price point to another affect our margin profiles? That gives our commodity and treasury team a lot of, I'll call it ability to then lock in a future ahead of time if the margin profile meets the business's objectives, right? So if the business's objectives is to maintain a particular margin profile, if you've got all of that information at the touch of your fingertips, you're going to be willing to take potentially longer hedge positions on items or make particular moves if you have all of that data ready at hand. So I'll pause there. I hope that answered your question. Naturally, nothing is going to, preclude us from being a victim of a volatile marketplace, but having the information ready at hand and the connection to our revenue management team has tremendously helped not only procurement, but our broader leadership make informed and educated decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Just another question that on my side, how do you continue to generate savings and drive cost optimization with incumbent suppliers?
Yeah, so I'll take that on too. Listen, within procurement, we are expected to offset inflation plus some, right? And so we actually take those objectives that are handed to us by our leaders, and they go directly to our incumbent suppliers, right? Our suppliers are held to the same standards as we are to generate savings. In some cases, it's an easy conversation to have where you are working into your contract terms and conditions, productivity or continuous improvement commitments, and if they fall short of those commitments, then they're writing checks, right? Some cases, those are easier said than done, but absolutely and especially in our strategic relationships, we are holding our suppliers, our incumbent suppliers, to the same standards that we hold ourselves, which is you are to offset inflation plus some.
Absolutely. Let's move on slightly. Let's go into AI, which we can't seem to get away from these days. And I saw there's a few questions coming in as well. I mean, how has AI technology been influencing procurement? And I guess a question that came in from the audience is what's the biggest impact that Gen AI has on procurement? Who wants to go first?
I can cover it just to start. So ProcureAbility recently entered into a strategic relationship with a supplier called D-Silo. They are an AI company and working to enhance procurement organizations through AI-enabled capabilities. They have a tool, it's called ProcureGPT. So we recently went through a demo. It's pretty interesting to see how it works, but it integrates with multiple platforms with your contract management database and procurement systems, and then it helps pinpoint any specific issues or opportunities within the contract or AP data. And then you can use that to improve any working capital, ensuring that you have contract compliance, risk management, and then also can spot any purchase price variance and highlight those. To address, thinking through how to enable AI, or should you consider that in your strategic plans for 2024, I would say it's going to be highly dependent based on where you are within your technology journey. AI is a top priority and consideration as you look into the future. It's clear that it's bringing a lot of transformative changes to procurement processes and supply chain functions, but the role can extend from process automation. It provides insights into procurement data and can really be used to drive efficiencies overall. I was reading just one example about how UPS is utilizing AI-powered GPS tools to optimize the routes for their vehicle fleet. So driving supply chain efficiencies there, and then looking for other ways to streamline on the back end.
Great. And Dan, so the question has come in whether your procurement teams have already incorporated the use of AI tools, and if so, what has been the main focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think this borrows the question of what do you define AI as? You know, we definitely have tools that are doing some level of machine learning in it. But, you know, this is kind of to Danielle's point, right? Where are you in your data transformation? Data obviously, you know, needs to be extraordinarily clean for these tools to be effective, you know, garbage in, garbage out. So we're fortunate enough that we've gone through that data journey of cleaning. Again, I'll say it's never done, especially for those companies who are products of, you know, M&A activities. But we're kind of, I'll say, dipping our toes into things. We haven't leaned in heavily into one particular AI tool or another. It's a lot of observe and see what's working and how can we apply it to our procurement practices. So again, there's nothing specific in the AI space that I can point to that would suggest everybody should go over here, right? It's how does the particular tools that are now entering the marketplace, how can they apply to your business? So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's early stages for all of us, right? So let's move on a little bit. How do the roles and responsibilities of a CPO, I guess, offer across different industries?
I would say there's, you know, common elements of the roles of CPOs across industries. There's, you know, strategic sourcing, SRM, cost control, but there are specific focus areas like regulatory environments or any unique challenges that are going to vary widely. So the CPOs always have to work to adapt their strategies and align with the particular needs or focus areas within your industry and organization. I would say, you know, from a manufacturing industry, there may be greater focus on supply chain integration to optimize some of the supply chain processes to ensure timely and cost-effective procurement of raw materials and components, maybe quality assurance and inventory management. Whereas in, you know, technology industry, there may be focused more on innovation, intellectual property, and cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And in your experience, what are the key components for measuring the success of the procurement function?
I can cover this. So each organization is going to be measuring the effectiveness and the impact through a combination of both quantitative and qualitative metrics. You should be regularly checking in on and benchmarking across industry standards to help improve the overall function of procurement. So some of those KPIs that we typically measure includes cost savings and cost avoidance, obviously, supplier performance, procurement cycle times, supplier diversity and sustainability, the contract management and how much of your spend you actually have under contract. And then, you know, what is, you know, on the other side of it, what is procurement's role in the supplier selection and what is the stakeholder perception of procurement? And then using those to drive some of your strategies moving forward.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Danielle, on that last comment you made, right? We do customer satisfaction surveys, right? And, you know, Danielle, you're right that, you know, a lot of the standard qualitative or quantitative matrix rather are pretty much in every procurement organization, savings, free cash flow, all that stuff. But we do customer satisfaction surveys, pretty robust ones, and we get great participation on it. And really those point us into the direction of what can we be doing better, whether it's cycle time, whether it's bringing general market intelligence to the table on a more frequent basis, right? There's a plethora of things that procurement can do to, well, I'll say, like, transcend traditional procurement involvement, right? So we do annually a customer satisfaction survey that's sent out to the business, and they fill it out, and that's an absolute measure of how are they viewing our effectiveness within the company.
And I guess equally to success, I mean, what do you see as the biggest barriers to success that you've seen? Maybe, Dan, you can talk to what you see in your organization, or Danielle, a little bit more general, what the barriers to success.
Yeah, I mean,
within procurement.
Campbell's Soup Company, over 150 years old, right? We naturally, and in most companies, right, there's always some form of a reluctance to change, right? So how do you navigate the change management, especially in a program that procurement is championing that is large and transformational, right? Where it impacts a ton of people and their day-to-day, how they manage their day-to-day workflow. So we've gotten used to it. We've done a lot of large enterprise-wide transformational projects, and it's very important that you've got good project managers assigned to those, and that they understand the end-to-end impact of what procurement might be, championing or trying to change, and that you've got leadership buy-in. The more your leadership is involved, the higher you can go with the leadership involvement, the better. Because if it's important to them, it will be important to the folks underneath them. And so we've definitely leaned into our leadership, leaned into better project management tools that help us in change control and communication as we roll out larger transformational initiatives that impact, whether it's a region or whether it's the whole enterprise. So those are areas that we've invested in as a company.
Go on.
Very similar to Dan is, one of the most common barriers that I see is resistance to change. So very similar to what Dan was mentioning, and this could include various forms and can really be challenging to overcome. It can include anything from lack of understanding of what the benefits of the transformation can bring, threats to your individual position as a procurement leader or part of the organization, lack of training and support, or you're just not prepared for how the new processes are going to be brought out. So making sure that you're overcoming these barriers up front and define an effective change management strategy with clear communication, stakeholder involvement, training, support, and then, as Dan mentioned, that buy-in from the leadership team is critical.
Absolutely. Final question for me. What's the one thing you wish you had? What's one thing you wish you had known when starting your procurement transformation journey?
Yeah, I'll answer this, and I've said it probably 5 times on this call already, is how important the data cleanliness is. As mentioned, right, we're all going through some version of a data transformation journey, and your data is only, if it's dirty, it's not useful, right? So your data has to be clean and in a way that is usable. And in some cases, getting to that cleanliness is incredibly difficult and requires a lot of support, but it starts there, right? It starts with data, because it will not only help you and your procurement professionals and their conversations with stakeholders, because if the data demonstrates that we need to be moving in one or another particular direction, you're going to follow it, but it is what unlocks the opportunity for what everyone is mostly curious about, is how can AI and all these other fun buzzwords that everybody has been talking about come in and transform the way we work, right? Starts with the data. That's what AI uses. So that's where you need to begin, is cleaning the data.
Absolutely. Is there anything you want to add, Danielle, or should we wrap up if there's no further questions from the audience? Covers everything on my list. So thank you both very much. It's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please take a few seconds to leave your feedback at the end of this webinar. But all that's left for me to say is have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Danielle. Thank Dan. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar today. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.